Although more importantly, I heard the food being put out, so I guess I'm between you and lunch. So I'll speak very briefly, which in the Senate is no more than an hour and 15 minutes. No, I promise I'll be a little bit brief from that. Thank you, Ryan, for the kind introduction. Thank you all for being here. I've heard, just by rumor, the word on the street, that Liberty students are all smart and hardworking and very dutiful and diligent. Is that right? I know that you've been provided with a copy of my new book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China, in front of you. I assume you've all already read the book and know what it says in that case, since you're such great students. But just in case, I wanted to speak a little bit about one particular line of reasoning in the book, one that may matter, I think, to you in particular. And that's the nature of the communist China regime, especially as it relates to our Christians, brothers and sisters. I wrote the book to ring an alarm bell about communist China and the threat they pose to our freedom and freedom around the world. As the title implies, it's something you don't always hear because China has such massive influence in America through corporations, the media, Hollywood, professional sports, higher education, our government, far too many American elites, celebrities, athletes, influencers, politicians are often cowed into silence. And I wanted everyone to know through this book the exact nature of the dangers and the brutality that communist China poses to us. And they pose, as I said, to our Christian brothers and sisters, because the truth about what they face in China reveals the brutal extent to which China will go to maintain its grip on power. Many people are surprised to know that China has one of the largest Christian populations in the world. Most estimates put the Christian population in China between 70 and 100 million people. It's also, sadly, one of the world's most oppressed Christian populations, and that's because they all live under the monstrous tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping. That's why the first thing I tell you in this book that you can't say about China is an evil empire. Because you have to understand, as Reagan did, when he said communist Russia was an evil empire, the twisted evil at the heart of these adversarial regimes to understand what they do to their own people and therefore what they might do to us. The sole source of power, authority, and control in China is the Communist Party and its current dictator, Xi Jinping. Sadly, the Chinese Communist Party is the longest ruling and most successful communist party in history, longer even than the Russian communists in the Soviet Union. Institutionally, structurally, and practically speaking, the party ranks above all else. The military, the state, what you might call the private sector, which doesn't exist in China, family, the individual, even God. Now, I know you've all taken American government classes, whether in high school or at Liberty, so I'm sure you can see immediately the drastic difference between communist China and our own democratic institutions. In China, there's no recognition of a creator who endowed each of us with inalienable rights. For communist China, the acknowledgement, let alone the existence of individual God-given liberty, is a threat to communist rule. That's why it makes sense that China is officially an atheist state. Communist China allows the Chinese people to practice one of 5 recognized religions: Buddhism, Islam, Taoism, Catholicism, or Protestantism. Because religion threatens the party's power, though, China tightly controls, regulates, and monitors all religious organizations. In short, Communist China inserts itself into every aspect of religious life to ensure the faithful bow to the God created by the party, not the God who created the universe. And in particular, as a Christian in China, you have one of 2 choices. One, you can follow the gospel revealed by Jesus Christ and face the communist consequences, or 2, you can follow the gospel according to Xi Jinping and the Communist Party. By law, churches in China are required to register with the government. To keep a close eye on and a fist around Christianity in China, the party forces churches to hand over their membership lists, to install its own party-approved clergy, and to censor sermons and teachings. The party is even rewriting the Bible not translating it, rewriting it to convert the word of God to the word of Mao. Let me give you an example. In John chapter 8, verses 7 to 11, in a well-known story, a woman is accused of adultery, and Jesus is asked if she should be stoned. He says in reply, "He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her." The crowd then disperses. Jesus turns to the woman and tells her, "Go and sin no more." The communist version has a little bit different ending. Instead of absolving the woman of her sin, after the crowd leaves, Jesus turns to the woman and stones her himself. He says to her as he stones her to death, "I too am a sinner, but if the law could only be executed by men without blemish, the law would be dead." That sort of blasphemy is nothing short of stomach-turning, I would submit, but it also goes to show you the lengths to which China will go to maintain its grip on power. It hopes to have that Bible finished in just a few years, but in the meantime, it continues to escalate its anti-Christian crusade. China has banned online retailers from selling other Bibles. It's demolished churches. It's replaced images of Jesus and Mary with pictures of Xi Jinping. It's torn down thousands of public crosses. It flies the Chinese Communist flag over registered churches. Children are not exempt. The Chinese communists are also trying to rid future generations of Christianity by eliminating Sunday school, banning children from attending churches, and forcing school children to sign pledges to remain committed atheists for life. Christians who follow Christianity legally in China are prohibited from practicing their faith freely and are stuck under the thumb of the Chinese Communist Party and its all-seeing technological police state. But it's only part of the picture. Tens of millions of those Chinese Christians, at least half of the total in China, refuse to submit, and they worship in so-called house churches, churches that are unregistered and illegal under Chinese law. There's an estimated 2,000 of them in the Beijing area alone. They are targeted, if discovered, with fines, evictions, arrests, and outright destructions by the Chinese Communist Party. For example, in 2016, a demolition crew in China buried a pastor and his wife alive as they bravely tried to prevent communists from destroying their underground church. Sadly, the pastor's wife suffocated under rubble and tragically died. Additionally, there are reports of unregistered Christians facing arrest and being forcibly held in facilities to undergo transformation or reform. Furthermore, other first-hand accounts indicate that unregistered Christians are even taken to concentration camps. Xi Jinping and the Chinese communists oppress and persecute Christians because their power and control are directly threatened by the presence of Christianity and its followers. So there's no question that China is, in fact, an evil empire. And the evil at the heart of the Chinese Communist Party reveals their motives for what they would do not only to their own people, but the rest of the world. Which brings me to the other things you can't say about China. Second, China is preparing for war. We have the strongest and most capable military in the world, but Communist China has the largest, and it's closing the gap technologically quickly as well. It is undergoing the fastest peacetime military buildup in the history of mankind. The second thing is that China is waging an economic world war, directed especially against the United States. You read in the news a lot today that Donald Trump has started a trade war. Not with China, he hasn't. With China, he's simply fighting back in the war that they launched against us decades ago, cheating and stealing our workers, our businesses, our nation, and using those ill-gotten gains to consolidate their own power and to undertake that military buildup. The fourth thing you can't say about China is that China has infiltrated our society. This is why you have pervasive censorship. and suppression of information about China. How many of you have ever watched a movie with a Chinese villain or a movie that reflects poorly on China? If you're a student, you haven't watched one made in your lifetime, I promise you. Really, no one's made such a movie since 1997, when 7 Years in Tibet was released with Brad Pitt, and China came down on him and the other actors and the studio like a ton of bricks. In the same way that you don't see the truth about China broadcast often on our nightly news, because every one of those news networks, except for Fox News, is owned by or affiliated with one of those Hollywood movie studios. Think about it. ABC and Disney, CBS and Paramount, MSNBC and NBC by Comcast Universal, and CNN by Warner. Do you really expect them to tell you the truth? Everywhere you turn, you find Chinese communist influence in our country. The fifth thing is that it's also infiltrated our government at every level. Sure, there's Chinese spies here in Washington, the way there are spies in most nations, trying to influence or co-opt government officials, intelligence officers, military personnel, but it goes far beyond that. They're recruiting mayors, city councilmen, county executives, state legislators as a kind of farm team for people who might be elected to national office or to become de facto lobbyists for their congressmen and their senators, or to give them concrete economic benefits in the meantime, like tax rebates and land giveaways. It's a well-documented strategy. Consider the case of Congressman Eric Swalwell, who was cultivated by a Chinese spy and apparently had a romantic relationship with her. It didn't happen when he was a congressman. It happened when he was a local elected official. He only later became a congressman and joined the House Intelligence Committee. The sixth thing you can't say about China is they're coming for our kids, and I include you in there, even though most of you are legal adults. They're targeting you with TikTok, which is a communist spy app and propaganda tool, specifically directed towards America's youth in a way to addict them and steal their data and expose them to the most vile, obscene, and distorting kinds of content, to include anti-Semitic content. They're targeting you in a kind of a reverse opium war, flooding our streets with fentanyl and other synthetic opioids, killing tens of thousands of Americans every year, especially young Americans. Finally, and maybe most alarmingly, the last thing you can't say about China is that China could win. I don't say that China will win. I don't say that I think China is on the verge of winning, but China can win. As Christians, we don't believe in vast, impersonal forces that are immune to human choice and free will. The future is not yet written about the fate of the conflict between America and the United States. It's up to all of us, individually and collectively as a nation, to chart our course. And we pray, chart our course with the continued guidance of the hand of divine providence, who in his omniscient wisdom has always guided this nation from its very beginning. So what can you do to make sure that China doesn't win? Not all of you are a senator or a congressman or a president, a secretary of defense or state, but all of you can make a difference. First, when you go to the polls, try to elect people who share our Christian faith and principles, who recognize that China is a grave threat, not just to its own people, but to the United States, an imminent threat, not just for federal office, but as I said, for state and local office as well. In your day-to-day lives, you can take steps as well to minimize and limit Chinese influence and power in your life and in our nation's life. If you have TikTok on your phone, which I suspect some of you do, you should delete it. I know that seems tough. Promise me, you'll probably be happier within a few months when it's gone. There's other bad social media sites that you can use instead of TikTok that aren't under the thumb of the Chinese Communist Party. When you have a chance, try to buy products that aren't made in China. I know it can be hard. In some cases, it's almost impossible. There are categories of products that we all use in our day-to-day life that really aren't made anywhere but China. That's the result of failed decisions here in Washington going back decades. Hopefully that we're in the course of reversing. But just take an extra minute or two. If you can buy American, that's even better. But at least look at where things are made. And if you can find it made somewhere else, especially if not made in America, a friendly nation besides China, go with that choice as well. And finally, I'd say the most single powerful thing you can do is to pray. Add to your prayers a prayer first for the Chinese people. Because remember, the Chinese people are the first and the worst victims of communism, going back 100 years. My son asked me recently, who's the worst person who ever lived? And I said, well, it's a tough competition. There's unfortunately been many monsters throughout history. But the man who holds the title for killing the most of his fellow men and women is not Adolf Hitler, it's not Joseph Stalin, it's Mao Zedong. The Chinese Communist Party has been oppressing and torturing and killing its own people for 100 years. And we should pray for them that one day they can enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy here in the United States. And finally, of course, pray for that continued divine providence guiding our nation, that we may always remain safe and prosperous and free. Thank you all. God bless you. God bless the United States.